Hello, everybody. So today we're going to continue looking at some graphic stuff, getting a quick introduction to that. Obviously, that's all we're going to do a lot. So what I thought we'd look at in class is the quick starting points, and that way you can start getting some practice with it. Possibly today, but it'll probably be next Monday before we get to it. We're going to start looking at the we did the quick pass at Game Maker. We'll actually take a look and build a small game in that, like we did before. Only it'll go a lot quicker because we've already done one pass of basic game logic in the course. We're just looking at it in a different setting. So as we look at 3D modeling, it seems like a good time to make it make one of the characters for that game that we're going to do in our in class example. And well, that's going to be a 2D game, but you might remember the other day after we did our 2D image and set up those animations, we just put a camera there and took a bunch of pictures. And a lot of times, especially if your character is going to be viewed from a weird angle, so like the overhead things where the character's walking around the village, interacting with NPCs, to draw that by hand, you'd have to stop and think about all those angles and how you're looking at everything. And a lot of times it can be a little easier just to go ahead and make a 3D model and then put a camera looking down at it and take a picture, take a 2D picture of that 3D model, fully animated and stuff. That is a viable option that can sometimes be easier because it's like molding with clay. We have those 3 dimensions and we're building the full shape. We don't have to think about perspective and shading and all those other little details. The computer can handle that. We just worry about what shape the 3D thing is. And that's what we're going to look at today. There's multiple ways to approach it, but you can think of it as like molding with clay. We're going to build up some sort of shape to represent our character. And just like we saw with the animation the other day, then that shape, the one we're actually looking at, is a skin. And we can assign a skeleton to that. And just like we saw with the 2D animations, move that skeleton around, get some keyframes so that the computer knows what position to be in at different points in time, and build an animation that way. So it's the process is fairly straightforward. It definitely takes practice. It is an artistic thing. I did get something the other day that I thought I'd bring that in and show. It came in the mail Monday, so like probably while we were in class. But I did get one of the nicer pens. I guess people on a Surface or Samsung, they have really nice pens. I've heard mixed reviews on the Apple ones, and the people that would have really good input on it are the professional artists I know that use Mac, and they all buy really, really, really expensive ones. I went to show somebody was talking to somebody about this the other day, and went to show them these type of pens, and when I pulled up some images on a Google search, usually they start around 50, 60 bucks. Go up to several thousand. That's one the professional artists use, very, very expensive. But Amazon had one for 30 bucks. So I thought I'd try it. Then it came in Monday, and Tuesday when I got home and had a chance to look at it, I realized I didn't have any batteries. Or Monday night when I got home and had a chance, I didn't have any batteries. So I've only used it a little so far, but it's more like drawing with a pencil. So it does just plug in with USB port. There's a little pad that has a surface that when you're writing on it, it's like moving a pencil around, and it feels like writing on the good quality sketch paper as opposed to a stylus, which is that funny rubber. Y'all have all seen styluses before, right? In our modern world, that weird rubber pressed up against glass. It doesn't feel the same as a pencil. So that's what these things are for. It's like, it kind of feels the same as a pencil. If I just share my screen, I can do an annotation. So, did that turn on? Okay, there. So you can see it switches the mouse to little bitty crosshairs. So I am just moving the mouse around with this. You can see that in the picture. And then when you touch it down to the thing, it's like clicking. So here in Zoom, I can probably, oops. I'm still definitely not quite used to it, but I can at least do a quick annotation thing. So annotating is, it's more like using a pencil. I should just say that. So actually write my name and it feels like writing with a pencil, makes it a lot easier to draw things. Than trying to move that mouse around. And if you're used to drawing with a pencil, you can get, it feels a lot more natural. It also works like a regular mouse control. There's buttons on it and stuff. But this one was on Amazon for 30 bucks, just plug and play. Has a little battery here, but since art isn't related to what we're looking at in this class, I wanted to at least mention that. It would have been nice if the pencil was here when we did 2D stuff the other day, but I guess I didn't order it quite soon enough. But 30 bucks isn't too bad compared to some of them. Anybody that has a Surface or a Samsung device, those have really nice pencils. And I've heard mixed reviews on the Apple Pencil, but pen. It feels more like a drawing on paper, which if that's what you're used to, can be a lot. Make a big difference in the quality of your digital artwork. Although some people have probably been drawing with a mouse since you were a baby, so you want to do what you're used to, but it's something to look into, consider, keep in mind. It can make a big difference, especially on 2D stuff. I'm not going to try it on 3D stuff with Blender for the first time. Yeah, I guess this might take a minute. I'm going to kind of go somewhat slow, so we can go ahead and jump in here, and if time allows, we'll jump into some more game stuff. So last semester, I can probably pull up a picture of what I did last time I taught this course. I made a little dragon item. Yeah, I'll just do this. I wonder if where I have that stored. I can pull up the one. It wasn't like a finished version. I started with a cube and one of our ways of doing 3D modeling. So open a new project in Blender and you can follow along, but to fit everything in class, it's going to go kind of quick. So maybe watch and the videos will be available. I back things up on YouTube. I think I mentioned that before. That's where I use what I use for long-term video storage. But I usually don't get the videos up there for the weekend, but Zoom has different controls than what we're used to. Everybody's used to the Zoom YouTube controls, so I'll get the videos up on there soon. And then you can pause and rewind, follow along the examples. So when we start a new example, we're looking at a camera, a cube, and a light, and we probably want those things, but the camera and the light are almost in the way right now. We don't need those until our shape is finished. So it's pretty standard to go ahead and delete them. And the first thing I always do is push W, the W key a couple times, is in window, and that switches how we select stuff. So we can select stuff by drawing a big box or making a circle, selecting everything within this little circle that shows, or the third press of W gives you like a freeform selection. So you just draw some random shape and it selects everything in that. I find that one to be the most useful way to select because we have a 3D model showing on a flat surface. So boxes and circles, even if we're trying to select a box or circle, we might not be looking straight at it. We can see it on that cube. If we're looking straight at a cube, it doesn't look like a box anymore. It looks more like a six-sided one, hexagon, if we're looking straight. Unless we're looking straight at it, a cube starts to look like a hexagon. So that freeform selection, or just draw whatever shape we want, can be really, really useful. So delete all that stuff to start with. I'm getting ready to put a cube back in. And there's two ways that we can do stuff. And I did come up with an example for our class example. We'll build a snowman, and it involves both ways. But a real quick pass at them. The preferred way is to start with a single shape. Or should I do the intuitive one? I'll do the preferred one first. The one that's generally better form. We start with a single shape like a cube. And what this cube is made of is actually several spots floating in space. So we have 8 points in space, a vertex. So just because I know the size of a cube, that first one is right farther. Yes. So over here, this is the positive side. I'll click on the one looking at these axes. The labeled one is the positive direction on all 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. So over this cube right, this corner right here, that's 1 unit over, 1 unit up, and 1 unit out. So 1, 1, 1, we mark that spot in space. If we come at the same Z-axis and come back the Y-axis, so we're at -1 on the Y, still a +1 on the X, and a +1 on the Z, we mark another one, and then create an edge going between those. And I'll hold on Shift to multiple selections, or that freeform selection, which since I switched from object mode, just like the whole thing, into edit mode, I have to start over with the selection. Just kind of draw a circle around the ones I want to do. Once we have at least 2 vertices, we can connect those vertexes or vertices, would be the proper term, but it always seems wrong when I say vertices, because we still think about them as an individual item. We can connect them with an edge. And then we keep going around, and once we've connected enough to fill in a shape, like that square I just highlighted there, we fill that in with what's called a face. So we have vertex, a bunch of vertices is the proper way to say it. It just doesn't sound right because we have to think about them one at a time. But a whole bunch of vertices mark points in space. Then we have edges connecting those points in space. And when we fill in a polygon, we can put a solid face there. We can switch it to wireframe, kind of see through things, just looking at the vertexes and the edges. Look at it, the solid shapes, or put on a material. We'll talk about materials soon. Color's not quite enough with 3D. On 2D stuff, we can just say what color it is. But on 3D, we need a little bit more. We need to know what type of material it is. Is it metallic? Is it plastic? Is it transparent like glass? How's it tinted? We need more information. How does the light bounce off of that material? How's that? And when we get to games and start applying physics, how do other materials interact with that material? So we have all of that stuff. But the first thing we need to do is make a shape. And to do that, basically, we just take our vertexes one at a time. I've got the little arrows here, and just move each vertex into the spot we want it to get the shape for it. On this cube, there's only 8 vertexes. There's only so much to do with that, right? So another common thing, I'll go back to the original cube. If we push A to select all of them, we can add more vertices in. So the first way to do that would, if you right click, there's an option to subdivide it. And you can add more vertexes and edges. It duplicates each one. There's a little menu down here. You can subdivide several times. And as soon as you do an action in Blender, this little menu pops up until you do the next action, and then you can fill in parameters for that. So maybe we wanted to cut it in half more than once to get something to work with. Maybe cut it in half like 4 times. Gives us a lot more little faces and vertexes and edges to move around and build the shape we want. And then we can select them right next to where we go into edit mode. There's these 3 buttons to decide how we select. So the first one selects by vertexes. And when you've selected enough vertexes to fill in an entire shape, an entire face, it highlights that. So that's how you select an edge. Enough vertexes to mark out a specific edge, or enough vertexes to mark out an entire face. You can select them one by a behind that way. Or you can select by edges. This middle button there will allow you to select just the edges. And once again, if you wrap all the way around your polygon, select your face. Or what a lot of people find easiest, especially starting out, is that third button, and you can select the whole face at a time. So get you a whole bunch of faces, vertexes on there to form lots of edges and faces, and just click each little surface. And then you want to move that into the spot you want. So what I did last time, probably a bit too much. I started with a cube, and then we can also add to this. We extrude more material out of what we started. So if I push E to extrude, I can kind of stretch those up. And if I zoom in, so we can kind of see it here maybe. If I zoom in where I'm looking at the inside, notice when the extrusion, I can't really find a good angle to look at it. If I'm in here, the extrusion, no, it's not good. Oh, there it is. The extrusion didn't add more on top of it. It took that top layer and moved it up and added some walls to it. So we don't have any extra stuff inside, in the middle. That's why this is the preferred method, because then we just end up with a hollow shell. The one we're going to look at next, which is a little more intuitive to start with, we start adding shapes together, and then when we build up something, we end up with a whole bunch of extra stuff in the middle, which is overhead for the computer to process. We can't ever see it because, like, if we put two spheres together overlapping, so it looks like an eight. Well, we're going to build a snowman. Our spheres are going to overlap a little when we stack up a snowman. So that part where they overlap, there'll be vertexes and faces and edges that we can't ever see because they're inside of the other one. But the computer processes them still. So if it happens, that could add up eventually, especially if we're doing it 140 times a second, right? And that's where you've probably heard about low poly stuff a few times. Minimize the number, it's like minimizing the number of polygons on that make up your shape. At one time it was necessary, definitely not necessary anymore. Anymore, people do it for fun. It's like a little challenge to see how low they can make it and still keep where they lose quality of where they want. So that's the basic way, the first basic way, and kind of the preferred way. You start with a cube or a sphere or whatever, a cone, whatever makes the most sense for the starting point, and add some vertices and edges if you need them. Another useful one, it works best if you're, go back to vertex selection. If you push K, you can just, that's for knife, so you can just cut extra edges in and add a bunch of extra vertexes at wherever they're needed. So K for knife, and then you like cut lines, and when those lines cross, it automatically forms a new vertex to work with. But you'll want to get lots of vertices, edges, and faces to move around and form up the shape you want. So what I did last time, I'll do really quick here. Let me go back to face selection. So to make like a shape, I'd select two like that and maybe extrude, bend that out, rotate that surface so it's pointing downward a little, extrude, bring that out, rotate it again, extrude, bring that out, rotate it so it's flat. That looks like about a foot. And maybe I could grab this one, move that back and that up, and up here, grab these, E to extrude, and I'll move that over and down. Oops. I'll push R to rotate. That'll be an important one. R rotates, and then if I push X, that restricts it, so I can only rotate around the X axis. So bring that forward, and extrude out another one, S for scaling, make that really big, extrude, extrude S, and, oops, scale that one down and maybe rotate it a little more forward. Rotate around the one axis. So just little movements. We're going to look at this a couple times, just previewing. So extrude, rotate, scale. Should sound like that transform matter, right? Extrude adds a little bit more. Move that to the location you want. So that's like the location you're going to rotate. How is it going to be rotated? How is it scale? So we're setting a lot of transform data on all these little polygons. I'll do a quick one here. So this is something like what I did last semester. Maybe a tail since it's a dragon, and just build up a little shape like that. So we're starting to get sort of a shape of an animal going on here, right? Or I need the legs over here. I'll do that real quick. I'll choose these faces, extrude them out a little, and oops, rotate around the y-axis this time. Extrude that out some more, rotate, and then restrict it so that I can only rotate around that y-axis. It's a lot easier to do things one axis at a time. Extrude a little bit more. There we go. And we start building up the basic shape of of whatever we want. So we throw some wings on this and start have like the basic shape of a dragon. So you can see it takes a little bit of time. And then just keep making more and more fine adjustments to get the shape you want. That's the preferred method. The other method is a little bit more intuitive for people, where we stack up shapes. So choose either edges, go into edit mode, and choose either vertexes, edges, or faces, whatever is the best way to, whatever works best for you to select it, and you want to give it some trial and error. Remember, Control Z is still undo, and play around with it and get used to moving those little dots around in space, and then it's just to connect the dots. Most of us did that when we were little kids, played with the connect the dots pictures. So all we have to do is position all of our dots, and then the computer will connect them. And that gets our 3D models. I'm gonna go with the other easier to use one. And as always, this is being recorded, so maybe follow along, click around some. Might be better to follow along with the recording, so you can pause and rewind that. And YouTube is full of tutorials for Blender. So watching it in the recording would be the typical tutorial you would see on Blender. YouTube has many, many, many channels dedicated to it. The other one, we're going to add and mesh. Where's this computer? Oh, no. Zoom was beeping in the other room, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't somebody coming in our room. When we add stuff, so cube wasn't our only option. We also have spheres, cylinders, and under mesh, monkey. This is the logo for Blender, a little monkey shape, but you can see if we go in edit mode, it's just a whole bunch of those vertexes positioned in space to eventually form this picture. The little corners really go around, and the edges connect the dots, and then once it fills in the shape, it gets colored in basically. That's the logo for Blender. Has a name and everything. And that's not the only one. If I go over to edit, I can turn on other things like I do all of my CAD stuff here anymore. This one for years. Oops. I could like go ahead and install Bolt Factory. And now when I add under mesh, I also have the stuff to create a bolt and parameterize it so I could use the standards. Actually, that is a standard, isn't it? Yeah, so I could set it for a standard M10 bolt to do any engineering projects and stuff, 3D modeling. But it's built up the same way. All those little points in space adjusted around until we get the proper shape we want there. There was one I started a few years ago, because sometimes getting this, when artists are doing that, if we want to do something very accurate, you have to spend a lot of time right at the beginning to get those accurate proportions and everything. So I set up a Blender plugin. If I can find it on the list. No, I gotta go up here. How do I get to my edit on the task first? I'll go in this way. I set up one with a bunch of starting points that have those proportions all set up accurately. So I spent a bunch of time researching sizes for animals and proportions and everything, and using pictures. Like, that's another common one, is like set some pictures, and then you have that picture as a background and you move the dots around to match the pictures. Usually 3 different views, like a front view, a side view, and an overhead view. You have those 3 pictures as backgrounds, and different, depending on how you're looking at it, and you can just move the dots around to kind of match that picture and get something realistic. But I spent a lot of time doing research to get all the starting points. So all the proper proportions for, I think that's an Indian elephant in the picture there, or a tiger, or it's smaller than a tiger, so it has to be a red wolf, as opposed to a gray wolf that would be slightly larger than the tiger. I think this is a green iguana like we would see in Florida, but it's not finished, as you can see from the picture here. It's still a starting point, and I set it up as a plugin, so you just click that add button, and that's some of the meshes you can choose from. Or a rabbit, or that's a Western bullfrog, so bigger than the bullfrogs we have in Indiana by several inches. You probably notice it's the same size as the Eastern box turtle. So I spend a lot of time, that way the artists don't have to waste that first half an hour and a half or so getting the proportions going. The artist can just jump in there and start adding fine details in. So we have lots and lots of different starting points, which also have this one right here as a script. If you want to take note of where this script is, that was something I was going to give to you all in a moment, which I have here in my computer. We saw Blender is scripted in Python. I already downloaded that one. I just did that. I'll send it out to y'all. Bless you. In here, and I grabbed one of those. That particular GitHub repository, everything's set up to add as a button. So you have to dig the script back out of there. But I did go ahead and grab this one. So this is what it looks like. So we have a bunch of vertices, some edges and faces, and with edges and faces, we can pick one or the other, as far as because it's obvious. Right? If we know the edges, then we know which faces those edges surround. And if we know the faces, then it's obvious which edges surround them. So we get to pick or choose that as far as what the computer's actually processing. But when we're editing it with the mouse, depending on the situation, one might be more useful than the other. We mix and match them, but there's all 3 of them. So here's the vertexes, edges, and if I turn on text wrap here, bird wrap. So you can see there's lots and lots and lots of vertexes. Each one is a vector, a 3-dimensional vector. So it comes up just a little bit, over just a little, X, Y, Z. So out a little bit on the plane, and then up a little bit. And then our next one, a different X, Y, and Z spot on the plane. And then there's an edge that connects the spot those vectors are pointing at. And they're vectors, so that's from the origin. We can move that to any position. And you can see there's a whole bunch over here. Let's turn word wrap off, just get to the next part. Bring my cursor down here, and same thing with faces. If I turn word wrap back on now, oh, it went to the top. A whole bunch of vectors, and then we get down here, faces, and what that is those 4 numbers refer to 4 of the vertices by index numbers. So we have an array or a list of vertices there. I'm not sure how big it is. Could pull up the list, but index 2. So the third thing in our list is one of the vertexes that make up this one, along with the index 912, 884, and 996. So the computer can look at those 4 numbers, go figure out which vertex it is, and fill in the face that goes inside of those vertices. Lots and lots and lots of them. And then finally down here, we can put a name on that and then build it up from that data. So that's what's actually happening in the background. And then we can just add it to our scene. So if I run this script, this is what I was going to give you all this one, and come back to layout view. I was apparently zoomed way out. It's half a human. And I just did half on all of those because humans are symmetric, right? If we do all the editing on the left half, we can just mirror that over and do the right, and we have the right half. And then do the fine details at the end for the non-symmetric parts. Life forms are nice like that because they're symmetric, so we only actually have to do half the work and then just tell the computer to mirror that. So I'm going to send this file out. All you do is put it in the scripting section and run it. And then when it's selected over here on the right menu, the orange one is the transform data. That's always the thing. That's the thing we work with the most. It's still lots and lots of buttons, but we spend most of our time with transform data, just like we do in our game engine. Lots and lots of functionality, but we spend most of our time on the transform. Worrying about where it's at, how it's rotated, and how it's scaled. Right below that, when that person's selected, there's a little gear thing. It says modifier properties. And if we can add modifier, and one of the modifiers is a mirror. We can just mirror that half. So we only have to do half the work. You probably want to just like start doing some work on it, or and then when we mirror that half, we actually have that. If I go in edit mode real quick just to look at something, see we have it. Right now we're only previewing that other half. So we turn that on and we can do all the editing just on that half, and it'll automatically show up on the other half. And then when you're ready, there's an apply button over here somewhere. Oh, we could switch which axis we mirror it on. So it wouldn't make sense here, but we could mirror it on the y-axis. Actually, that looks kind of neat. I can think of all kinds of situations where that might be a neat little thing. Or the z-axis. Whatever the situation calls for. And oh, I don't need the z. Then where was the apply button? Oh, and then when you're done, from the little drop down arrow here, you hit apply, and I'll go back in edit mode to see. And so now we have vertexes all the way around. So you want to turn that modifier up, mirror modifier on, and then work with the preview so you only have to do half the work. And then when you're ready, hit apply. And like in the case of a human, there's going to be some things that aren't quite symmetrical. Video game characters' scars are the first thing that pops in my mind. Scars and tattoos for your video game character aren't going to be symmetric, so you would do those afterwards, after you set up the ears and general tone and stuff. And then that is a quick way to get a human. There's also object shade smooth. So a human would probably want to choose smooth shading, and there's a starting point for a character. You can draw that Python script. So that one, you can look at what three-dimensional modeling data looks, see what three-dimensionally model data looks like in Python, and have a starting point so you don't have to waste, so you don't have to spend a long time figuring out how to do this. Because I spent a lot, I put a lot of care into those. A lot of people have launched off that plugin and continued that work. They're like, oh, this is neat. So a whole lot of people forced off that GitHub thing and have made a other button, extended that library, so that artists don't have to waste that first hour and a half or 2 hours looking at Wikipedia articles and things, figuring out what the proper proportions for an American green iguana are. They have to start the correct proportions to start with, and then they just need the details. So I'm going to send that out to you after class. Basically, just run the script and apply a mirror modifier. And when you first click it, it just previews it, and you have to, there's an apply button to actually put that in there. And either shade smooth or flat, either one. But hearing the Zoom sound from the other room keeps throwing me off. I'm hearing an echo from it, so it's still coming from behind me, like where the microphone is, or where the speaker is. Like, was that in here? So obviously that took a lot longer than we have in class. You can use that as a starting point to have all the different fingers. So when you put your rigging in there, you do all the, what is it, 5 times 3, all 15 metacarpals. Is that right? Yeah, carpals on the hand, tarsals on the foot. You do all the metacarpal buttons, or if the game called for it, all the metatarsal buttons, and the skin is set up correctly. The mouth is an opening. It's closed here. But you put all the face bones in there and stuff, which is another really useful tool. I might as well show while the person's here. Had the add armature button, but the same way I made that library, Blender's open source, not the only person that's ever made a library. A very popular one that you'll probably want to turn on anyway. If you go to edit and preferences, that's where we get our plugins, and search for Rigify. This is a very popular one. This is a whole bunch of prepared skeletons, so we don't have to start from scratch every time. So hit the checkbox and then install, and it should probably go to the default location. Just install the. There we go. I guess it's on now. I was expecting a message to say complete or something. But now you notice there's a bunch of armatures there. It's not just the one option where we start with a single bone. We can still do a single bone, but there's a human rig, which appears to be a little bit bigger than my character. So I'm going to push S and scale it down in every dimension. So a little bit bigger. When I set up the human, it should be 5'10", and a half. It's in meters, but 5'10", and a half is the average, is what Americans call the average size. Those arms are in the wrong spot, but you'll see, like, let me hide the character. You'll see all of the face bones are in place. And all 206 bones for a human. It's also set up for inverse kinematic setup. No, it's not. Bones for the pelvis, the ankle. Oh, yeah, there it is. These bones floating off in space, those are for inverse kinematics. That's the fancy term for the old marionette style puppets. They've been around for thousands of years. Some of the earliest artwork we know about shows people using marionette puppets. So humans have known that for a long time. But we don't have to control every single bone. Think about when you walk. You probably haven't paid attention to it since you were very little. If you just walk across the room like normal and try to let your mind think about the only thing you're thinking about as far as walking, the only thing you think about when you walk is your ankle. all we think about is our ankles and the rest of our body comes along with it. That's how the marionette puppets work. That's why you only need like, um, that's why you only need like 6 to 8 strings to control a full human figure with the puppets. Everybody's seen the puppets. In software, they went with the technical physics term, so it's inverse kinematics. But we can control the ankle, and the rest of the leg comes with it. And you can see all the facial bones and stuff there for talking and expressing. And I had that in mind whenever I was making that character, which that's definitely more than we're going to get into today, but that character's there if you want to use it. It gives you a good starting point to play around with. A bunch of vertexes there that you can start moving around and getting some practice, seeing what you can do, and then delete it and run that script again, and you're right back to the beginning. So good practice tool. You will probably want to go to edit preferences and turn on Rigify, because there's more than that too. Quadrupeds are useful. Oh, I guess that's what that other option that popped up was. They have some other stuff on GitHub. They have a lot more, but the basic quadruped. So there's a basic human and a basic quadruped shape. Okay. You're probably going to use the basic human shape, not the meta-rig. See, there's a lot less to deal with there. Move those away from each other. Sort of the bare minimum to animate a character. Because a lot of times we're not going to worry about every single face lesson. Right? That's for like DreamWorks to worry about how the facial expressions and how the upper cheekbone moves when somebody's happy and all those details. We just need the basic walk. So you might want to install that library, mess around with stuff, but really the thing is to just start working with it. So back to meshes. The other way, instead of starting with one and stretching it out to what we need, is we can build it up from what we need. So maybe a house. So I'll start with a cube, and then on top of that, I'll go in a cone. That'll work. Decorate a house. We could adjust things and get the shape we need. As scale, get that a little bit bigger. Kind of like a little village hut. Then add materials so that top part looks like thatch or grass thatching, and the bottom part looks like mud walls to get a quickly drawn hut, or spend some time with it. But we can add pieces together, and that's what I had in mind for today's example. Something for the game I had planned. And notice that each one shows up over here. It is well worth your time to come over here and rename them. I don't see a rename button. If you double click on it, you can get to rename. Select it and then double click to rename it. And this is the roof, or this one's the hut. Because when you build things up this way, you can very quickly get to something that's easy to get lost in, right? Way too many pieces, and if you need to select a particular one, it's like, okay, it's one of the 75 cubes on here. So it's worth your time every time you insert it. The organization thing, just take a couple seconds to go rename it. So that would give us a house. But that's the other basic thing. We start with those basic shapes, put a bunch of the basic shapes together, and then do those little modifications to get the one we want. But then again, there's extra data here. Right? We can't see the top of the cube unless we zoom all the way inside. So that's not really going to show if this was like a background prop in our game, but the computer's still processing those 4 vertexes and the edges in the face there. So this method does lead to that, but it's usually people think this is a lot more intuitive to start with. So let's see. Is what I had in mind was build a little snowman, actually like Frosty. It's gonna have a snowman with feet, so we can animate it walking, and or do something like that with our game. Uh, Probably copyright infringement if we weren't in a classroom or tried to charge money for it, but that was what popped in my mind. And mostly because I think I went a little too, tried to do too much at first with the game lesson. First time I taught the course. And our quick coverage of Blender included making a dragon. It's like, oh, wait, probably should have done a simpler one. Then when I did the 248 class, all we did was a house. And that went much, much better. We made a house and then duplicated it a bunch of times. A shotgun house. Siding and the little workout front. And I think everybody in America knows what a shotgun house is, right? They're you look confused. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, the narrow ones, like around 20th Street in Louisville, where it was the factory workers, or in that case, the port, would eventually the place that eventually became known as Portland, because that's where they stopped. That's where all the boats landed and put things on carts to go past the waterfall and then back on the river to get the rest of the way to New Orleans. But all the workers needed to be close by, so they built narrow houses. So instead of spreading outward, everything was just like in one long row. You walk through everybody's bedroom to get to the kitchen at the back of the house. I think Charleston's like that too, isn't it? There's a bunch of shotgun houses there, or are they more like ranch homes? Anybody live in Charleston? I guess nobody in the classroom lives there.
Say Georgetown's kind of like that.
Georgetown's like that? Okay. I know Charleston really grew up around the ammunition factory, but it might have switched to ranch homes. Because that would have been the 40s. But either way, that's a distraction. That went off, a simple thing went off much, much better than trying to draw a dragon class. So I was thinking of a snowman. As always, planning goes a long way, so I'm just going to do planning things. And something that shows up a lot in classrooms is you'll have pieces due, like UML. Probably heard about that, Unified Modeling Language, the International Standard of Communication for Technology, and some fields of IT do a lot more international communication than others. So we have a pictorial-based language that's standardized across the world. Right now it's the middle of the night in China, but 12 hours ago, some students in China were learning the same diagram for UML diagram as we learned in our classes. We have those polished final versions, and we lose sight of how useful those can be for like planning purposes. Planning, when we sketch them out quickly and make a mess of them, then they're useful for planning. Same thing with graphics here. We're gonna make a snowman. So that's gonna be our example. So obviously the first thing we need for a snowman is a stack of snowballs. And this is going to a game, so I'm thinking actually like Frosty the Snowman, which means he's going to need to interact with other things. So how tall would Frosty be? Probably not 6 feet. I think a snowman would be taller than the average human man. So 5'6", 5'5". That seems like a good height. Just a guess. So we want to make it about that tall. And that's going to include some feet. So 2 more small balls so that our animation goes nicely, and then the stretched out ones that will actually be the feet. That'll give us some animations. So we need this to be about 5 foot 5 inches. Blender's going to do meters, so we can do the conversion, but avoiding all the particular math, I'm going to call it, say, 1.3 meters. A meter is a little over 3 feet. So a third of a foot, so that would be 4 foot. 1.5 meters. That's a nice number to work with. We'll shoot for 1.5 meters. So our big snowball needs to be most of that, right? That's the belly of the snowman, the big thing, so 0.6 meters there. Leaves us what, 0.9. And then these are going to get smaller. 0.4, 0.2. I'm just taking guesses on some sizes here. So, and the reason for doing this, so then that leaves 0.3 meters here. And that, I guess, split that evenly. So like 0.15, 0.15. And then make your model the size it needs to be in your game. Like all of your models. And then everything's the appropriate size when you move into your game. You don't have to worry about resizing it and trying to eyeball it and make it look right. I guess if it's Frosty the Snowman, we'll need a little top hat. And then some sticks. I'll just find sizes that look right for the sticks. Probably wouldn't want to mirror the sticks on a snowman. On a human, that our right and left arms are going to be symmetrical in matches of each other. But if we're putting sticks on a snowman, it would look very, very strange if we had an exact duplicate of a stick. Found the same stick twice. And a carrot. Couple eyes. I don't think we really need a mouth, but we have a bunch of basic shapes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spheres. The top hat, we can just take a cone and stretch out the bottom of it. Add a little plate on the bottom so it looks like a top hat. Or sorry, a cylinder. A wizard would have a cone. Then a carrot is just a cone. The only thing that's going to make it a carrot is when we color it orange.
I have a question, Chris.
Yes.
Could you make it to where like the snowman like didn't have feet and it kind of like just like hopped or like kind of like skidded on like the bottom, like the bottom ball?
That would be fine for your game. You just leave that all. And
Okay.
I'll handle with the transform data.
Okay.
The only reason I was putting feet on is because I wanted to go over the steps for animating it.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yes, if you're following along, and that would kind of make more sense for a snowman, because we don't prop our snowmen up when we build them. But I'm just including feet because I wanted to go through the steps for animation.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and then the last thing, we just need 2 little cubes colored black to make the eyes of the snowman. So it's mostly basic shapes. And then the sticks, we can start with a cylinder, make it really small and just start extruding it, move in a random direction. And when we get out to the end, put a couple splits there so that we have 3 different ones and extrude those in different directions. So it kind of covers all those steps, the 2 basic steps we combine basic shapes. And then on the sticks for arms, we can do the extrusion methods and see kind of both of them. Let's see, 155. What is it gonna take? Yeah, now might be a good time for a break then, because we're ready to start putting this together. And if we don't take a break now, then we have to stop in the middle of something, right? Does 10 minutes sound good? I see head nods here in class. So the clock on my laptop says 1:55. So we get back to it at 2:55 and build a little snowman in Blender and then animate it so that we can use that in our game maker game example next week. I'll see y'all in a few minutes.